Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. I was just saying Emily Chandler's not able to join us today because of babysitting challenges. COVID makes it difficult. So I'm going to be your chair today, so I'll need your help. Anyway, let's get started because it's a big agenda. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest from anyone? There being none, let's proceed. I'd like to welcome our guest today, Johnny Bowes, the Manager of Environmental Services for the City of Stratford, and also Scott Knapman, CEO of Festival Hydro. Welcome and thank you for coming. I thought we should proceed with adoption of the previous minutes just because in the minutes is one of the motions related to part of our discussion today. So I'd like to ask if to adopt the previous minutes. Are there any comments on the previous minutes? No, from the meeting of April 1. So may I have a motion to approve the minutes? Jody, and seconded by Mike Jorna. Great, thank you very much. So we'll proceed with, I guess, Johnny, have you go first and then we'll have Scott go next. Thank you very much, Johnny, for coming. I think you've come in response to a request we had to look into geothermal. So thank you very much for coming. And I guess, do you have a presentation to make?
Kind of a hybrid presentation and discussion, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I wasn't at the February 4th meeting. However, I did review the meeting minutes and some of the questions that came up, and hopefully I can contribute to some of those suggestions. And obviously any takeaways that come from this, I can always come back to another meeting or anything to respond. But so one of the things from the last meeting was Ms. Stratton suggested that a geothermal expert attend a future meeting. So in that regard, I've actually reached out and been speaking recently with Jeff Hunter, who's the Vice President of the Ontario Geothermal Association. And what they are is a not-for-profit organization that represents geothermal energy designers, drillers, manufacturers within the province. And their goal is to promote Ontario's geothermal heating and cooling industry. He basically describes the group as the organization as a group that tries to bridge the consumers, the government and industry professionals, and trying to create awareness and the importance towards working towards new energy sources. So I did ask him several questions that I got from the minutes related to this committee. And I asked actually if he would join a future meeting as a guest speaker, based on, if this group would want that or not. And he said he'd be more than happy to come in. And, I said if he was to come, if he was to speak some history, some current trends, and future state of geothermal, I said I assume the committee would be probably willing to get some information on that. And so he said he'd be more than willing to come in the future, just give him a time and date. So at that end, I'll leave that with you to bring in somebody from an outside third party kind of discussion. So in regards to some specifics from the minutes, Mr. Jorna in the last meeting asked if we could speak to the possibility of ground heating sources installed during road reconstruction projects. And actually, I was wondering if you could confirm something. The minutes referred to heat plates. Most of the work I've been dealing with is more for geothermal systems, and I was wondering if it was specific to heat plating that you were referring to, or geothermal in general.
It was not. If I could respond to you, my feeling was that geothermal heat is one of the best ways of moving us off carbon when it comes to space heating. And in a lot of cases now, the municipal lots are not big enough to sustain a field for geothermal heat exchange unless you find a way of drilling straight down and getting the heat that way. So my suggestion was, if it was at all feasible, to gradually start putting geothermal heat exchange systems beneath the road allowance in such a way that either it might be for individual homes or it might be for a block at a time where individual homes could tap in. And the idea was at that time that maybe new subdivisions could have it installed right away. And I know that as a former chair of public works for the city that, we rebuild every road over a period of about 50 years. But then I was thinking about it some more and I thought, geez, if Whiteman can drill all that fiber optic into the ground so efficiently, could the same thing be done with heat exchange pipes at a level deep enough that it would serve as a source of heat for homes, which could be sold by the city to individual homeowners as a utility, just like natural gas and electricity and sewers and water, etc. So that's kind of where I was coming from, Johnny, if that explains.
Yeah, no, that clarifies it great. So I'm not sure if the committee is familiar with the pilot project that's being done in the city of Markham right now. They've got there's a collaborative group effort that's being done by the city of Markham, Mattamy Homes, who is the biggest developer in the country for new subdivisions, and a company called N-Wave. And so essentially what they've done in 2018, their council passed and they started construction in 2020 for a new 331 home subdivision that is net zero green, perfect, as good as you can get it is kind of their goal, right? So what they've done is they based it off a subdivision in Arizona that was apparently the first kind of group and company and area to do something like this, whereas the entire neighborhood is fed from their heat source and cooling source is from geothermal, a communal geothermal system. And I'll just do a quick screen share here to kind of give sorry, is that showing there?
We have it.
Okay, so it's a little, it looks like a bunch of spaghetti basically because it's showing all the utilities. But essentially, if you look at the red, and then the blue is the water main, the servicing, the green is the sanitary servicing, and the yellow is the gas. So the red essentially would be another underground utility very similar to gas. And what they do is they use vertical geothermal systems to draw the heat source up or the cooling source up and distribute it throughout the system like a distribution water system. And then they would have individual lines that come in and come out. So this is the way they're moving towards. Now, where it gets complicated with something like this is that there's essentially a new utility that's created. So N-Wave being the company that's supplying this infrastructure, they're working with Mattamy Homes, and the subdivision is created in this one like-minded scenario. Whereas the road reconstruction, Mr. Joyner, that you're speaking to, it would be a little more complicated in the sense that you would need a utility provider similar to N-Wave, for example, who would have to be on board to install this new infrastructure while we're doing a reconstruction project. And they would have to install it basically in the hopes that people over time would connect to these systems. So the profit for them probably isn't really there at this time for a road reconstruction because they would have to install all this infrastructure, maintain it, and hope that over time people connect to it. Whereas a development like this, they're doing this in agreement with the home builder, or sorry, with the developer. So all the homes are there, all the profits there right off the start. So I think this Mattamy subdivision, I think, is one that really we need to keep an eye on moving forward because it's the first of its kind. I shouldn't say it's the first of its kind, it's not, but at that scale and at a municipal setting like that, with the involvement of the city and the developer and the utility provider, I think it's one that should really be kept an eye on moving forward because it could really set the precedent for this type of system and to see the feasibility of it with a new development and the way Stratford's growing, obviously, with new developments coming all the time. You know, if it was something that they were going to look into down the road, I think it'd be very important to follow this kind of closely and see. Now, that being said, a big thing to point out with these systems is that they have to involve what's called a vertical well, which is where if you don't have the horizontal distance to bury these lines, you have to go down. And the issue with that in Stratford is that obviously we're a groundwater aquifer water source. Whereas the city of Markham, they're a source water. So all their water comes from Lake Ontario, gets treated in Toronto and sent up to Markham. So they don't have to worry about underground aquifers, water supply, anything like that. It's not impacted. So the city's current, our current bylaw, section 29 of our water use bylaw, has kind of a catch-all statement. It doesn't really incorporate geothermal systems specifically because at the time that this bylaw was updated for the private well section, geothermal systems weren't really as common practice in the industry as they are today. So we have some wording that basically says that we restrict the use of any private well water supply that connects to the city's water supply. So one of the geothermal systems is what's called an open loop system, where essentially they drill down and they draw water up from the aquifer into the house, and then they discharge it back down into the same aquifer. So that's where the city really has to be careful with where we're going to be heading moving forward with this, because like I said, at a city like Markham, this is not an issue because they don't have a groundwater source, right? Whereas the city of Stratford, we have 6 wellhead protection areas surrounding all of our water sources that we don't ever want to impact, and they're very vulnerable. So one thing that we are looking into is in 2022, we want a budget to have a consultant come in and do a study on the potential impacts of vertical geothermal wells and their relation to the vulnerability of our groundwater aquifers. So largely municipalities who already have detailed procedures and policies for these kinds of systems, like the city or the region of Waterloo, for example, they're at a size where they have environmental engineers, hydrologists on staff that can really shape their program accordingly. The city of Stratford currently doesn't have those resources, so that's why in 2022 we think it would be a great idea to have a consultant come in and kind of review that. And I've been in discussions with the Conservation Authority, and their main concerns are the wellhead protection areas and what impacts these because these vertical wells can sometimes go 200 meters in depth, which are much deeper than some of our wells right now, some of our supply wells. So I think there's a much bigger look that needs to be taken at our city, and it might also have to involve some updating of the bylaws and that sort of thing moving forward. But at least we have that kind of catch-all right now in our bylaw to say that we don't permit private wells in the system. And that's why I think the timeline, if we budget for next year to have this study done, because the project in Markham, it won't be completed this year anyways. It'll be probably a couple of years before it's even fully done. And if we're kind of tracking that at the same time, it might coincide with a study. And by that time, I think the environmental services and the city itself will have a better understanding of where we think we want to go with geothermal systems. Now, that being said, and sorry, I feel like I'm going on at length here. That being said, there is another type of system called a horizontal geothermal system. And in that case, you only need to go down about 10 feet. And the idea is that instead of going vertically down an extreme amount, you use space. So a lot of rural homes, if a private person wants to have this done and they have a farm, for example, they've got all the space in the world to install that. And then in a city setting, people with big parking lots or buildings with big parking lots can utilize this type of well. Some of the industry large lots down on Wright Boulevard, for example, they have the space to incorporate that kind of thing. And obviously the risk is extremely low because they're only going down 10 feet. So there's not really a risk to our aquifer. So there are some things that, short term that I think would be allowable. We would obviously have to look into a little deeper, but would be allowable within what we think is safe for our water supply. But that being said, I think we need to really have an in-depth look, because geothermal systems are becoming a lot more popular and as an alternative green source. But the city needs to do its due diligence to make sure that the water supply is obviously protected and that the vulnerability wouldn't be impacted at all. So that's why, looking into next year, that's where I'd like to go with that.
Great. Thank you very much, Johnny. So do you have time for questions?
Yes, of course. Yep.
Mike Jorna?
Yep. Well, first of all, I'd like to really compliment you, Johnny, on coming in with what you came in with. I think it's terrific how much thought has been given to this. And it certainly makes it very feasible for new subdivisions. But what we've been talking about in this committee has been, the need to go to net zero carbon in the next 30 years. And that means that probably somehow the older part of the city will have to be addressed. And at first I thought doing it when we reconstruct the streets, but it should also be possible with a horizontal system, at least, to drill it under the right of way, like they did the fiber optics. And the other thing that strikes me is that the geothermal systems that I'm aware of have a surprisingly small area of horizontal field for the heat exchange. Now that may very well depend on the geology. It's something we could look into, especially if houses are going to be much better insulated, then the requirements for the ground heat will be downgraded. And the other thing that crossed my mind is I certainly understand the water concerns if you go with a vertical system, but could you add a little note to your investigation about closed loops in a vertical sense? Because they don't affect the water table once they're installed, as far as I know. And the final thing that I'll say before I turn it over back to the chairperson is that I would really like to see this investigated for the older part of the city, because to the best of my knowledge, that isn't being done anywhere right now, not on a large scale. And the city of Stratford likes to think of itself as being on the forefront of these things, and we could maybe pick ourselves a heck of a pilot program grant from some other level of government to take care of some of the things that you mentioned, which are absolutely correct, about finding somebody to install it. So having said those things, thank you again, John. I'm really impressed.
Yeah, no problem. I have a couple of points there. So in regards to the closed loop system that you referred to, the only thing, so in speaking with the Conservation Authority, the big concern with closed loop systems, you're correct that it doesn't actually draw water from the aquifer, but what it can cause is what's called a transport pathway. Whereas if you're drilling down deep enough and you're close enough to certain pockets of that feed into the aquifer or something like that, you can impact the underground flow. So that's the Conservation Authority's kind of concern with that, is that it would create these transport pathways, depending on the depth, like you say. That being said, one of the things I researched about the city of Markham, so some of the skeptics towards that subdivision, their concern is that geothermal systems in true geothermal areas like California, Arizona, Iceland, for example, it's much more consistent, whereas Ontario, a province like Ontario, where the ground is so different, if you drive 4 hours in any direction, it's a little more untested, so to speak. So I think that's another part of to true geothermal that I think you were speaking to. And as far as the older part of the city and pilot programs, that's where I think Mr. Hunter from the OGA would actually be very good to speak to that, because he is kind of on the forefront of future trends and where this industry's headed. So I think him and I did speak to it a little bit, and that's why I did touch on at the start. His big concern with a road reconstruction was that you have to get a utility company on board for that, and it's not at the point where that's as maybe as easy as it could be for where they're much more confident going into a new subdivision to get their profit. But that being said, that's why I think it'd be great to have Mr. Hunter in to address a question like that, because he would have certainly. And you're right, there are like the city of Markham, they got a $285,000 grant towards the engineering of this project. So I do agree that if there was a pilot somewhere down the line, that there certainly would be funding from somewhere that would move for that. So
thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. Are there any further questions? Jody?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot, Johnny, for your presentation. And I just had a couple questions.
Sure.
One is about the study that you'd like to do that's going to be hopefully referred to the 2022 budget. Would you like us as a committee to make a recommendation that would go to ITS, or you're already on it and you're going to add it to the request list?
Yeah, so we had we haven't had a groundwater study done in a number of years. We're well within the requirements and recommendations of when we have groundwater studies completed, but I think it kind of falls in line with the timing of that. So I was just going to put it in as a typical request. Yeah.
Perfect. And my other question was, I guess, or maybe comment or connection that we can make. I'm also on the community services subcommittee. And I asked, we're redoing the big parking lot at the Rotary, and that's areas for horizontal systems seem to be big parking lots would be great. City-owned big parking lots would be excellent, even if we just use that energy to power our own buildings or heat our own buildings. So I did ask that, because we're looking at redoing that Rotary parking lot, that would be looked at as a possibility. So I don't know, maybe I'm just telling you so you can connect with community services to maybe see where that's at, maybe give them some advice, because clearly you have a lot of knowledge about it. So, and maybe that would just give them a little reminder that I requested that.
Yeah.
And also for I would love to see that in other corporate or city properties. Just kind of have a look at, if we're going to be redoing a parking lot, if you only have to go down 10 feet, it doesn't seem like that would be too difficult a task to be able to add it, at least for our own buildings.
Yeah, the big difference I think would be if you're doing a resurfacing of a parking lot, you're probably not going down that far. That being said, you wouldn't necessarily need the whole parking lot to be 10 feet deep. It would just depend on how many tons of energy, how many tonnage you need to supply that heat source. But no, I completely agree that if the space is there, and the nice thing is the horizontal, there's such low risk, and my job is to, I'm certainly not a hydrogeologist and an expert on this geothermal systems, but as being responsible for the water system, my big concern is the vertical wells, but the horizontal themselves, like, they're very, very low risk, and I would have almost no issue with those. So yeah, if the space is there and it can be used, I would be a big proponent for that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Great,
You're
thank
welcome.
you. Any further questions? Sammy?
Hi, Johnny. Thank you so much. That's really good information. And I personally don't know a lot about geothermal, but it sounds promising. I just have some concerns regarding emissions and environmental factors, because if we do really want to reach the net zero emissions that we're hoping to set, we have to be very cautious with different initiatives we take on to ensure that it will actually reach that goal. So I was just wondering what the emissions were comparison-wise to other ways to heat and cool houses or energy.
Yeah, thanks, Sammy. That's a great question. I don't have all of the facts in front of me. One figure I do have, though, is so geothermal systems for a home, they do require electricity, obviously, because you have a heat pump that needs to function in order to heat the home. The figure that I do have in front of me, though, is that it's supposedly 5-to-1 improvement from a typical fossil fuel source. So, but I could come back with some more detailed information on the actual emissions. Yeah, unfortunately, sorry, I don't have the full answer for you there, but I can certainly follow up on it.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Further questions? Well, I do think we would like to have Mr. Hunter come. That would be wonderful to really expand our knowledge of this. So thank you very much, Johnny. We will get in touch to get him to come and see us. Our last meeting this year will be in June, so that might be too soon, but certainly in the fall.
Yeah,
And
he even said next month would probably be fine for him too, because like I said, he's a big promoter and advocate, and so I think if he had the opportunity to speak, yeah, he would certainly be on for it. So yeah, I'll reach out to him this week.
thank you so much, and we look forward to hearing about the emissions. Hey, thank you, and you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if you like, but we understand if you need to go. But
I do have a meeting at 5, so unfortunately I'll stay for a bit, but then I have to leave it. But thank you very much for having me. It was, yeah, a pleasure to meet everybody, and I hope to see you again.
We hope so too. Thank you. I've learned a lot. Okay, and now on to another energy subject, on to Scott Knapman. Welcome to our meeting today. We look forward to hearing from you, and I understand that you have a presentation too, and then we'll have some questions after.
Yes, well, thank you very much for inviting me. I didn't know what specifically the agenda was, so I've just prepared a presentation that's a bit of an overview on Festival Hydro, as well as our affiliated company, Rhizome, which is in the more in the telecommunications business. So if I can just share my screen and take you through that. Okay, hopefully you can see that.
Yep,
Okay.
very clear. Good.
It's jumping ahead on me. So just a bit of background on Festival Hydro. The company, you probably know it better as the PUC, which would have been its name prior to 2000, when the government started to deregulate the power sector. It broke it up. Hydro, it was Ontario Hydro, which was broken into Ontario Power Generation, Hydro One, and a number of other companies. And at the same time, local distribution companies, which were largely municipally held and still are, and there's about 66 of these left in the province today. There has been some consolidation going on over the years. As you know, Festival Hydro is a child of consolidation as well. We serve about 21,000 customers in the communities of Stratford, Brussels, Dashwood, Hensel, St. Mary's, Seaforth, and Zurich. And that's what I mean by saying that it's a kind of a child of or a beneficiary of consolidation, because those different distribution companies were all merged into being put together under Festival Hydro. Festival Hydro is 100% owned by the city of Stratford. Our service area is about 43 square kilometers, and we run about 231 kilometers of circuits. Those circuits are largely overhead or aerial, except in the downtown core areas where they are underground and new subdivision. It's all underground as well. Our sister company or affiliate is called Rhizome Networks. Technically, it's called Festival Hydro Services, Inc. And it provides dark fiber assets, largely in Stratford territory, although we have assets outside of Stratford as well. We also run the Wi-Fi service, so the free Wi-Fi that's in the downtown core, as well as a non-contracted Wi-Fi service for consumers in the area as well. We also sell a lit fiber, a fiber that's able to transmit data. Dark fiber are strands of fiber that you then have to put the electronics on to transmit light over. A lit fiber already has that with it. We also have a data center, and the data center allows customers, especially commercial customers, a way to store their data on servers, which they can own, that is safe and secure and away from their main site. So if something, a catastrophic failure were to happen at their main location, all their data would be securely backed up in a center that's environmentally controlled and has backup generation as well. The same Wi-Fi network is the same one that is used to leverage the autonomous vehicle network that's within the city as well. So you may hear the term DSRC, which is the technology used, which allows automobiles to talk to the infrastructure. So that's this is really cutting edge technology that Stratford has rolled out, and it piggybacks off the network infrastructure that Rhizome has built. And again, a lot of this is underground duct structure for our fiber optic services in the downtown core, and then more aerial when you get out to more of the periphery. Regarding Ontario's generation capacity, Ontario is one of the cleanest jurisdictions for power generation. About 96% of our generation is actually from non-emitting sources. About 50% of that is nuclear. The rest is renewable, or a lot of it is renewable through hydro generation, run of the river, wind, solar as well. At Festival, we have 3 solar installations. Each one's about 10 kilowatts. So we have about 30 kilowatts of solar generation that we produce. and we sell that power into the Ontario grid. So that's all renewable energy that's produced there. The gas that you'll see there, gas comes in only during peak periods. So Ontario really runs off of nuclear and hydro predominantly. And then at peak periods on a very hot summer day, when you need additional capacity, that's when thermal power comes on, and that's gas fired. There is no coal left in the province. That was all retired years ago. So overall, it is a very clean grid. We also participate in the Green Button. The Green Button is an application that was rolled out a few years ago. There were a few distributors like Festival Hydro that endorsed it and embraced it and rolled it out to their customers. And now the government is actually starting to look at mandating this across the whole province. And what it allows customers to do is to go in and look at their meter data, and they can see how they're consuming it by the hour, and understand what things they're doing and how they could change their behavior to reduce their power bills. So it's a lot of people being able to make informed decision based on information if they want to go and pull that information down. We also host one of the largest battery storage facilities. Now, again, this is cutting edge technology. This was installed about 3 years ago. It is used currently for helping to balance the system, but it has a lot of different applications. It's lithium battery storage, so just the same type of technology that's in your phone, but this is obviously much, much bigger. It's about 9 megawatts of power, 8.8 megawatts. That's its capacity, the most it can put out. And then that translates to about 40.8 megawatts of hours continuously. So although it's right now, it's used for balancing the system, looking at voltage sags and whatnot. It could be used for other things, and a lot of these systems are, and we're seeing a lot of large manufacturers in our area to install these systems, and they're more for load shifting. So taking power that's cheaper at night and charge the battery, and then discharge it during the day when the power is more expensive. And this also helps reduce our emissions, because then we don't have to run those gas peaker plants as much, because this power is coming back online again. One of the areas that Festival was very active in, it was the delivery of what was called the conservation and demand management programs. And you might recall these were coupons to buy LED lights for consumers. There were benefits to small business for lighting retrofits, and large business where you could get an energy manager. They would work with you, look at your consumption, and reduce things. So altogether, through the 4 years that the program ran, we reduced consumption by about 40.6 gigawatt hours, which is a pretty significant amount of power to take off the system and work with customers. These programs were moved back into the government in 2019. They still exist. I have a slide coming up on that. But we continue to work with customers, even though we can't formally deliver these programs at this point. We continue to work with customers and give them tips, and these are on our website as to how they can reduce their power consumption as well. And this is a slide I just mentioned. These programs that were moved into the what's called the ISO, the Independent Electric System Operator. They took over a delivery of these programs at a provincial level. And there's not quite as many programs as there was in the past, but nonetheless, some of these programs still exist, and customers, we can connect customers with them to take advantage of these various programs. Some of the other initiatives that we have, we try to incent customers to go to paperless billing. This has become even more important during COVID, because we're trying to keep the offices safe and whatnot, and keep our customers safe. But nonetheless, we try to move people towards paperless billing, which reduces the demand on the environment. We provide tips on how to conserve energy at home. The same thing with businesses on how to reduce their consumption. The Green Button facility, by providing that information, that meter data, is another excellent way you can look at what you're doing and then change your behavior. We also offer a net metering service. Now, net metering, if you're not familiar with it, is allowed for generation up to 500 kilowatts of renewable energy. So if you're producing energy, the energy that you produce that's greater than what you consume gets pushed back into our system, and you get a credit for that. And then you can use that credit later against when you're actually consuming and pulling power from the grid. So that's a way for customers to look at a financial benefit should they wish to go down that road and install those types of systems. We're also having an extensive study going on right now, looking at our grid to say, what do we need to do to make sure that it's hardened and robust enough to accommodate what we anticipate in growth in electric vehicle charging stations. If you think of the typical scenario, everyone comes home from work at around, say, 5 o'clock and plugs in their car to recharge it. That is a lot of drain on a system that was never designed to have that kind of immediate load placed on it. So we're actually studying our grid to see what we need to do to make sure that the grid can withstand that kind of load being placed on it in a reasonably tight time frame. Other ways, looking down the road much further, is there may be opportunities that you're seeing this with the Nissan electric vehicles where they're bi-directional, where you can actually pull power back out of the vehicle as well. And that could be used to feed a home, or in the future, perhaps an energy marketplace where people can actually trade power amongst themselves as well. That's technology is really very premature at this point, and the regulations don't permit it. But that's certainly something I think we'll see in the future as an energy marketplace, and I would see Festival Hydro playing an important role in that. And then we also sponsored the 2021 Tree Power Program, which some of those species sold out in minutes. And of course, the more trees we have, the more shade we have, and that reduces air conditioning loads on our system. So that's a benefit for everyone as well. So that was my presentation. I'm pleased to take any questions that you may have on either Rhizome or on Festival Hydro.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. Obviously, you've touched on things that have come up in our discussions here many times. So I guess we'll go to questions now. First question, Mike Sullivan.
Thank you, Scott. That was very informative. The problem we have is that almost every house in Stratford is heated with some kind of fossil fuel. And over the next 30 years, those all have to change to electric.
Mm-hmm.
And the federal government's got a $40,000 grant that, or loan, I guess it is, that is coming out in the next year or so when they finally finish it, that will help with that. But what is Festival Hydro planning to do to accept and to help with the cost of this quite massive change that is going to happen over the next 30 years?
Well, we continue to look at our grid. I mean, these loads are, frankly, the systems, the grids in Ontario couldn't handle if everyone converted over tomorrow from gas to power. The systems aren't designed for that kind of loads. So we continue to look at our grid and look at what we need to do to upgrade it. So we have quite a robust program right now on upgrading the grid, making sure that the grid is maintained and stable. And that's why, we see very few outages. Our reliability rates are very good. But how do we make sure that we have the grid for the future? And if we're going to see that kind of cutover from gas to heating, because heating is a very high load, then we need to prepare the grid for that. And that's a very costly undertaking, quite frankly, to do that. So, we're looking at these programs and we'll continue to monitor them and see how this progresses and what do we need to do as a company to make sure that we have the system in place to support that conversion. The discussion earlier on the geothermal, these types of technologies are a lot better than the old electric heating, where you have a resistive load that is incredibly high. Geothermal is an easier way to do that because you're just pumping things around. And that project in Markham, I was involved in some of the early discussions on that. That is an excellent example of a district energy play to do, and district energy has certainly been very popular in Europe. But the business model has to be that everybody connects, because you can't just build it and hope people will connect to your loop. The fundamentals of the business case won't hold that way. But if there's ways to do it, as Johnny mentioned, when you're building new communities, to hook them all up, at that time, these are things that we can certainly work with developers on.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Emily Sykes Skelding.
Hi, Scott. I'm interested in, working towards net zero. Obviously, residents have a large role to play with that, but also business and industry. And I was just wondering if you could speak kind of in general terms, not specifics, but are there many businesses that take advantage of some of your incentive programs, such as the energy performance programs that you have locally? Or do you find that there's a lot more room for industry and business locally to start kind of jumping on board with some of those incentive programs?
Well, I guess there's always more room for people to embrace it. We saw the take up was a lot better when we as LDCs or distributors were managing the programs. There were more programs at the time and the incentives were quite good. And then we also had that direct contact with customers. So we had staff in the company who would reach out to our customers and make them aware of these programs that we were delivering ourselves and some of the funding that was available to do things like lighting retrofits and various other, pump motor replacements, going to variable drive motors, all these sorts of programs that would reduce their demand. So I think, there was good take up when we were operating the programs. Now we're not operating the programs. We have less insight into what customers are doing at this point in time. There was also previously the FIT program, the feed-in tariff program, where a lot of customers took advantage of that. I have a 5 kilowatt solar system on my house, for instance, and there were a lot of customers who took advantage of those systems. Those don't exist anymore. Net metering is the replacement. And of course, what you run into with businesses is helping them understand the business case for doing it. So if they're looking purely at the financial metrics, in our current environment, it's really difficult to justify the capital expenditure and the return period for many companies. But we continue to work with them and try to encourage them to do those things and make sure that our system and our grid and our people are there to work with them if they want to interconnect these systems, because interconnecting generation or battery storage systems into the grid is a complex issue because we can't allow power to be fed back into the grid. It would create a safety issue and other operational issues. So we work very closely with customers who are wanting to go down that road, and we'll support them in trying to take on those initiatives. And we do see some customers putting in battery storage systems. These are more the large consumers. And what they can do is there's a part of the bill that they receive called the global adjustment. And if they can guess the 5 times that that's going to be the most in the year, they can greatly reduce their bill. So we can certainly help with them and help them understand their bill and where those 5 coincident peaks are. We can't tell them when the peaks are going to happen because that's randomly set by the ISO, but we can certainly work with them on determining how they are peaking and what their consumption looks like.
Thank you. Further questions, Bonnie?
Thanks for that question, Emily. I was going to ask that too. Another question I had was, you hear people talk about different concerns with climate change and all the overhead wires we have and stuff. So you see lots of times in the States and different places when they're having storms and that, how they lose that. Do we actually work at putting wires underground as work is being done in certain areas, or?
We do in new subdivisions, everything is underground.
Right.
And we do in the downtown core where it's very densely populated. Where we have existing overhead, we tend to replace it with the overhead. And it really becomes a cost issue because it's very expensive to start boring and doing underground infrastructure installations. And of course, one of our objectives is to keep our rates low. So consumer rates for festival are actually tracking below, the annual increases are tracking below inflation. So we're trying to manage costs, manage our rates so that people have attractive business rates, both commercial to attract businesses to Stratford as well as consumers. So we're trying to manage rates, manage costs, and manage the reliability of the grid. So it's a bit of a balancing act to try and keep all the pieces in place.
For sure, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Jody, you have a question?
Thank you. I have 2 questions actually, and one of them is further to what Bonnie asked about. So in a new subdivision, we were just talking about geothermal and the possibility of adding a district energy heating system. Would that interfere with the underground network that you're installing for hydro? Like how somehow that would have to work together? Like how deep are you going? Like the geothermal's 10 feet and are you like 6 feet or?
Yeah, the geothermal would be much below that, and there'd be a coordinated approach because there's a lot of things that are going underground. You've got, Bell Telephone is putting theirs in. We may be running stuff with Rhizome Network as well. Rogers may be in there as well. So you've got the different carriers who are putting facilities into the ground, the power lines, the gas companies in there as well with underground. So you've got a lot of different utilities all bearing various things in the ground these days. And there's a coordination that occurs in joint trenching and whatnot. So it would be done, and the geothermal would be below all that.
Great, thank you. The other question is a little bit crystal balling, maybe. So we know that the Ontario government hasn't been super cooperative with any like incentives but do you see anything federally that might be coming our way that would help either consumers, businesses, anybody to sort of either go towards solar panels or, other ways, greening sort of ways? Have you heard anything coming down the pipe in that regard?
There's been a lot of announcements. I think the specifics are still being worked out on many of the announcements, but certainly the announcements are very encouraging. I don't know about solar panels per se, because in Ontario, for instance, energy is a provincial, in Canada, energy is a provincial jurisdiction. So the federal government couldn't very well fund us and kind of jump the provincial government. So there are just jurisdictional issues that would have to be worked out amongst the various parties as to how that would flow. So I think what they've been targeting, I think you're going to see things more around building envelopes. I think that'll be coming. And certainly there is around EVs, EV chargers, so subsidies for installation of EV chargers. There are some in the city today, and some commercial hotels have them as well. But I think there's opportunities to grow the footprint and the number of chargers as well, and have funding that would help do some of that.
Great, thank you. I was just, as a point of interest, I was at the former Central School yesterday with my daughter. We were peering in the windows looking at the new addition, and they do actually have a charging station that they've just installed, which is exciting.
Yes.
So they're slowly, we're getting more. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Other questions? Sammy or Keith?
Hi, Scott. Thank you for your presentation. I was just wondering again, many people have mentioned it and pointed it out that we're really trying to reach that net zero goal by 2050. And we've been looking at 30% reduction by 2030. But again, getting to those goals requires a lot of effort from the energy section, and consumption of energy needs to become more sustainable and renewable. So I was just wondering what the Festival Hydro has in place, or again, I think you mentioned you had 3 solar panel farms, I guess. But I just was wondering what Festival Hydro had for a plan in the future of how to increase their renewables, and or even just encouraging or how to get in contact with the provincial government to ask them to change and tell them that you want to see that change.
Yeah, so we work very closely with both our regulator, which is the Ontario Energy Board, as well as the Ministry of Energy, on looking at initiatives and policy changes that can help both the province and ourselves on various initiatives. And we continue to work very closely with customers on how we can help them conserve. Conservation is the best way. But I think, if you look at the list of things, buildings tend to be the biggest consumers. So how can we help companies with the building reductions and consumers? The next one is electrification of transportation. And this is something that, with the advent and the increase of EVs, electric vehicles, it's kind of nice to see that Stratford has its autonomous vehicle network, because AVs and EVs, there is a linkage there. So I think there's opportunities to try and leverage what's been done in the city already, as well as on the buses. There are some jurisdictions that are now running electric buses, and how can we look at electric buses. So anything along the transportation lines, and again, with our grid already 96% clean, anything that we can move over towards being fed from power is a benefit to everyone, because our grid is one of the cleanest in any jurisdiction.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions? Mike Jorna.
Scott, this is kind of maybe an off the wall question, but one of the clean energy sources for the future continues to be talked about as a hydrogen economy. I don't think there's any particular utility or group that are taking charge of hydrogen energy. Would Festival Hydro be interested in adopting, a hydro or a hydrogen initiative as it becomes available?
Yeah, and actually we've looked at that. There is one facility. There's a couple of facilities, a couple of things. Certainly you've got the ring gas going on at the land waste plant. So that's one area. Hydrogen production. The problem with hydrogen production, though, is that it costs a lot of money. The hydrolyzers take a lot of power to produce. So when you look at the amount of power in, power out, or energy in, energy out, it's not very attractive from an energy perspective. So therefore, to make these things work, you really need to have some kind of renewable energy source, because you don't want to burn power, gases, emissions, to create a gas that's now carbon free. So we are looking at various initiatives there. The best thing to do is if we can link it up with some kind of a wind farm or some kind of renewable generating source. We see this in the States. Enbridge has one system running up in Markham. Now it's a smaller system. It's designed for, again, it's sort of the same purpose as the batteries we have for ancillary services, but they are running electrolyzers and taking city water filtered and then converting that into hydrogen. And then they can inject that. I'm not sure if they're actually doing that or just storing it right now, but it is possible to inject it into the gas stream, with the methane. You can only do a small percentage of hydrogen input into the methane. So there's a limit what you can inject in there. However, you could also look at storing it separately. And if we're talking about electrification or cleaning of transportation, there's opportunities there to use it. So perhaps instead of electrifying the buses, we run an electrolyzer, create hydrogen, and then the hydrogen feeds the buses as an alternative to electrification.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. I just have one myself about solar energy. It seems to me that there are more and more houses appearing in the city with solar panels on their roof. And I wonder, we need to get off of our gas furnaces. And I might speak personally now, we're going to need to do that in the next 2 or 3 years. And I'm thinking we would go to electric, but is solar energy viable, or is it too expensive now for without any incentives or consumer?
It certainly is viable. And the technology is getting better, and the performance, the efficiencies of the panels are improving. So it is a viable source. Of course, the problem with solar is that it doesn't work at night. So you need some kind of a backup, either that be Festival Hydro is your backup as the grid, or you have battery storage, but you need some kind of a backup. And you need a lot of it to produce the amount of heat. If you're doing resistance heating in a house, that would take an awful lot of load. So you'd need a fair size system, probably bigger than what most homes can produce. Economically, without the incentives, it is a challenge. It's a long payback period that most people don't find acceptable. So that is another issue. But the other solar that doesn't get talked about is thermal solar. And years ago, there were, I believe it was federal plans for thermal solar, but thermal solar for heating is another way. So you could have both. You could have solar PV, which is electric, and you could have thermal solar, and you could use that thermal solar for heating swimming pools, so you're not burning gas to heat the family swimming pool. Use it for heating your hot water tank for your domestic hot water loads. So there's opportunities to look at solar, not just in the context of PV and photovoltaic, but also in thermal as well.
Thank you. So is that something that Festival Hydro is looking at?
We
Off
are,
of gas, or?
yeah, our expertise is more in the power sector. So solar PV is something that's within our skill set. We don't look at thermal solar.
Okay, thank you. Bonnie?
I'm a little bit confused about what is thermal solar again?
So thermal solar is you have glycerol tubes on your house, on your roof. And if you've ever gone by a house and you've seen what looks like solar panels and there's a big horizontal tank sitting above them, that's a thermal solar system. So you're basically running tubes full of like a glycerol that gets heated by the sun. And then that heat then gets transferred inside the house. So you're heating water essentially, or the glycerol. And then you're using that to then transfer that heat to heat your hot water tank. Or if you have radiator heat, you might boost. If you have home heating that's served by a hot water source, you may use that to boost the water, and then you just use natural gas to get it up to the full temperature.
Oh, that would be what we put on First County Greenworks, but that on Optimism Place many years ago.
Okay.
Because we used it, we raised the $20,000 and put it on there, so because they didn't want it for their electricity, their bill was higher for the water. So, oh, so I guess I never really connected that. There's two different ways. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, they're two separate ways. In fact, some countries, I believe Israel as a country, you must have thermal solar. I'd have to double check on that, but I think they do have an insistence there.
Great, thank you. This has been most informative. Any further questions? Sounds like we've been doing a series of, or we're beginning to do a series of webinars on climate action. So it sounds like we're going to need one on energy soon. So we may ask you to help
Very
us.
informative.
Yeah, this was very informative. Thank you very much. I've learned a lot. You're most welcome to stay for the rest of our business meeting, which won't be nearly so exciting, but please feel free to stay.
Well, thank you for that invitation, and thank you for inviting me. I think I will bow out because I do have a report I need to finish, but I appreciate this, and this is a lot of fun. So pleased to join anytime.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye. Okay, on to the ordinary old business. We have some exciting things though coming up. So next,
I just want to say I was really impressed with both of them. It's nice to see so much enthusiasm from, leaders in our workforce. I thought it was great. Both of them did a great job of explaining things and the future, and they seemed excited about it and wanted to do it.
Yep, I feel a webinar coming on. We just don't have enough time to do them all. Okay, great. I thought they were terrific too. I felt hopeful. Hope you did too, Sammy. Okay, so updates from our working groups. We're going to start with ecological this time. So Vanny or Craig, do we have a, no? Hello? You're muted. Hello?
Okay,
You
you
might
want me to
have
try and say something?
You might be able to unmute Vonnie with your controls too, Anna, if Craig doesn't end up.
I have controls? Maybe
Can you
Casey.
go over his
I'm-
video and unmute him as the.
If I just push his mute button? No, it says pin. Now what have I done?
Or
Can you hear me?
Tatiana or Casey might be able to. They're probably the hosts or co-hosts.
Craig, we can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear Craig.
Okay,
You can do sign language.
Yeah, I can use sign language. I'll just give you an update if you can hear me all right. My screen is really freezing here, so I don't know what the audio is like, but
The audio's
I'll
good.
give you a quick I'll give you a quick update on the shoreline stuff that we finished up down there a couple weeks ago. I got Quinn to put on the wood chips to a coat of wood chips all along the new area there. The next step is that we are going to plant some vegetation. We've got a number of serviceberry trees that are going in along the shoreline, all over top of the cribs. And we've got wildflower plugs set to go as well. And they're both sitting at Fanshawe and waiting to get into the ground. So I'm expecting those to get into the ground next week. And in addition to that, I've ordered some native grasses, something called Big Blue Stem. And I'd like to plant that along there as well. So the combination of the wildflowers and the native grasses are what we're going to do. I've had some lots of good comments about it down there. The landowners along there, I've got their emails, so I've been keeping them informed just by email, just saying, hey, I'm coming down. Here's what we're doing. And they've all emailed and said that they really appreciate the work. So I think that's gone over okay. And I've got a few people, just random people emailing and saying that they appreciate the work as well. So it seems to be going well. The one thing that we are going to do, I should mention that Charlene Gordon was successful in getting a bit of funding out of TD Friends of the Environment to help out with some more of the planting later on down there, and as well to upgrade those steps on the south side of the lake. If you recall, last year we put the big stones along there, but we also put those wooden steps to increase access to the water itself, let people walk down to the water. Well, we thought that we'd actually put some decking on that bottom step there, and Charlene is going to fund that through that funding there. The only problem is there's a goose nest there now, so I'm not sure what to do about that. Have to wait. I guess, Bonnie, can you speak about what you did yesterday out at the dog park, or do you want me to just wing it?
No, I'll just speak about that. So yeah, the city had ordered 200 trees to plant in the dog park, and we did that yesterday. We planted 200 native trees and shrubs. So in between the dog droppings. You have to be careful where you're planting. So it's that area where the ash trees were all came down.
Wonderful. That's great. Guess we need those dog.
Okay, so that's that.
Okay, thank you. Is that it for ecological? I must say the North Shore looks fantastic. I walk along there almost every day. It looks great. It's really beautiful.
That's good.
And even more beautiful.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is again, we are partnering with the field naturalists to do on June 8th to do a webinar on invasive species control. And we've got a fellow that I work with, Jay Ebel from the Conservation Authority, who is going to be doing a presentation on invasive species control and what he's worked on, or the things that the types of projects he's worked on in that area, as well as give an update on what's going on in TJ Dolan in that department as well. So that's, I think, the evening of June 8th. Yeah. I think Emily's sent stuff around on that.
Yeah. We did announce it with our and we did the April 22nd one, so we'll tag it for this next one too. Okay, thank you very much, Ecological, and that leads to Carbon Reduction Working Group. Just briefly, I hope everyone was able to attend the fabulous Earth Day presentation, Youth Speaks Out, and if you didn't, which was fantastic, and if you didn't, it is on the city website, as well as their very doable action plan. So we had Sammy Orr and the Eco Club and Ms. Ritzma from the school, and making presentations on waste, transportation, urban sprawl, and reforestation, which led into Quinn Mallett and Marianne Vanden Heuvel. And we had Emily Skelding did amazingly with all the tech and the production, with great help from Tatiana, and we thank you all for that. So our next session is in May 26th, Wednesday, and we have Eric Miller, who's the professor at York University in the Environment and Urban Change Department. We've we're titling it, Shifting to Neutral, Ecological Economics and Getting to Net Zero by 2050. And so we had a conversation with him the other day because he's an incredibly knowledgeable man trying to kind of focus what the presentation will be. And so that was very useful. So he's going to speak for 45 minutes. It's really about balancing the ecology and economy and metrics and balancing the economy with our well-being, really. One of the things that he suggested is that we will do this, we're going to repeat the webinar format with a Facebook live stream and the ways that people feed in for questions with both of that. But he thought that it would be useful to have a small panel of people, members of the Energy and Environment Committee who would kind of consolidate those questions and make sure that we get the questions out that we want out. So, and we thought if 4 of you might be willing to volunteer to be that panel, it would be great. And we can work out with you over the next 3 weeks or 2.5 weeks, the kind of key questions to ask him, and then we'll feed in the community questions into those. So I'm wondering, would anybody be interested in being on that panel or to sort of lead the discussion with him? Mike Sullivan is going to be the host and moderator. Okay, yay. Jody, Jeff, come on, we only need 2 more. Okay, well, you're gonna be busy, Emily Skelding, aren't you? Can you be on the panel as well? If you're handling the...
I can't unmute my, oh, there we go. Wait, okay. So if he is running his own video and doing his own tech, I don't think that I will have to do much in the background, especially if we're doing the webinar format. So I can still provide tech support, but I won't really have a large role as far as going through slides if he's doing that himself. So if nobody else volunteers, I can be one of the 4.
So we've got Jody, Emily, and Jeff. Okay. Well, we're going to ask another one of you maybe to do that too. But we'll be discussing with you how to handle that part of it. So he's a very dynamic speaker. I've seen him give a seminar. He has great visuals, and he's just so full of information. That's the only issue. But Mike Sullivan has taken classes with him, and it'll be a very exciting night. So we look forward to that, and we'll do a release on Monday and do it in collaboration with Climate Momentum again, and they'll use their network to help spread the word. And then, of course, we have invasive species coming up in June. So coming out of this, just one further thing, in the minutes, you saw a note about our budget, and we thought we had put forward a motion about spend for the gifts and honorarium for the webinars, but actually we didn't have a motion. In the budget, you'll see that that was in the minutes, there was, I think, $200 allocated for the webinars, but actually we're going to need more than that. This, for instance, this last time we had more people than we thought we might have. So I'm wondering if I might ask if, or I'd like to make, I don't know whether I can make a motion, but that we allocate $500 toward the webinar expenses. I wonder if anybody, and the $150 that was in the budget for refreshments for tree power didn't get spent since we didn't have any UTRA had to handle it. So would anybody be interested in that motion? Jeff? And a seconder? Mike Sullivan, great. Thank you very much.
You need to vote then, Anna.
What?
You need to vote on it then after.
Oh, right, we have to vote. Well, I'm sure everybody's going to say yes. All those in favor? Opposed? Good. Thank you very much. Good. All right. That's wonderful. So what's up next? Now, is Chris, we have a number of things here to go through, but as Emily's not here, the budget allocation discussion we'll put off till June, because I know Emily wants to be part of that. We've got Mike Sullivan and all that, but we also have Chris Bantalk and Jody. I wonder if we might want to skip to that now. Are you wanting to make the presentation on idling, Jody and Chris? No? Oh, we need to unmute you.
Oh,
Or am I?
I got it. Okay. I just had to wait for the special message. I was just going to go back to the last item just really quickly. So, we were sent through the action items for the webinar. So I just wanted you to know that I'm going to try to make sure that I keep checking back on this list to see where it is that we can put some of these items into action. The public garbage and recycling along the high traffic areas going to the school, I've already done that. So hopefully that will be moving forward. So I just wanted to let you know I'm gonna keep my eye on that. As far as the idling goes, I'm gonna call on Chris. He prepared a report that's gonna go to ITS next. So if he wants to give a little overview, that would be great.
Chris?
I'm gonna stay unmuted so that I don't have to go through that again.
There we go. Thanks.
Oh,
so just to clarify that, you guys, everyone saw the report that was circulated. Awesome.
thank you.
So yes, we just prepared a brief report, just kind of going over the recommendations and the revisions that were spoke about at last month's committee meeting. The two revisions in the report being recommended for the bylaw are the change from the 5 consecutive minutes to the 1 minute of idling, as well as the removal of the temperature exception for the time permitted. I have spoken to staff in IDS and we're able to get a number of signs ordered for no idling so that we can increase awareness in the designated zones that were identified, so mainly being the downtown core and school zones. So we'll work to put up a number of those signs if this goes forward and is approved. The signs do have the maximum time that is permitted for idling, so the current signage in the downtown will be updated to reflect that. And then the other piece just touches on the education moving forward. So I spoke with the city's communications lead, and he's okay to work with this group to come up with some more regular messaging that can touch on the environmental impacts of vehicle idling. And then we already have a good supply of stickers that I believe were developed at some point over the last few years. So we can make sure that post-pandemic, once we can put out more distributions and touch points at front counters, we'll be sure to get those out to other city front counters as well. And then this group, from my understanding, the discussion at the last meeting was to be looking at the development of other distribution materials, whether that be bookmarks or flyers. So I guess that overall, it's just looking to see if there's any feedback from the committee before we take this report forward. We'd be looking to take it to the May 26th ITS subcommittee.
Great. Thank you very much, Chris. Any comments, questions? Sammy?
Hi, Chris. I had two thoughts. First, I remember from, I think, a previous meeting, 2-stroke engines being added to this or being included. I was just wondering what decision was made on that or what happened with regards to that.
I can make to that. I think it was my assignment to look around to see if I could find any other places that had a similar idling bylaw, and I could not find one. It doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't pursue it. But what I would think the best way forward is, if we want to discuss amongst ourselves, if we think that's an important element to the idling bylaw, then as this report comes to council, then I can bring it up there and say, the Energy and Environment Committee would like us to consider adding this to it. And then we can have the discussion at council. So I guess I'm putting it out to all of you. Is that something that we feel strongly we want to add? Knowing that if it doesn't exist in a bylaw elsewhere, that council might be reluctant to add it in. However, I'm happy to put forward the argument that I think it should be added in. It's just as Chris pointed out before, it's a matter of enforcement. Sometimes it could be difficult to enforce. The other side of it is it would probably be rarely used that people would attempt to enforce it. It would be a neighbor kind of using it as a tool to control what their neighbors might be doing. And I couldn't imagine that having a big uptake, but I don't know. Thoughts from anyone in the committee?
But Chris, I think you've got a comment to make on that too.
Thanks. If I could, through the chair. So yeah, certainly we heard that discussion at the last meeting. And I think from staff's perspective, the decision to not include that was kind of looking at, it is specifically identified as a vehicle idling bylaw, and that being the main intent of the bylaw. So the only revisions addressed were directed towards vehicles and kind of keeping that general nature of the bylaw intact. And as mentioned as well, I think the main reason why you wouldn't see that in other municipalities' bylaws is because of that enforcement piece. And we've got we don't necessarily have the resources to be able to proactively enforce the idling as much as perhaps this group would like to see. So again, the best way kind of going about this generally is through that education piece, but certainly being able to address the vehicle side of things through this bylaw.
And that brings up another point. Maybe we look at the creation of a separate bylaw that deals with two-stroke engines and keep it separate from the vehicle one. That would make a lot more sense. And I do know there are some jurisdictions, mainly in the States, that have bylaws or regulations around the use of two-stroke engines. So maybe we could peel that off as a separate topic and to allow this idling bylaw to move forward.
Great. Okay. Further questions? Mike Jorna. He needs to be unmuted.
There we go.
Okay, got it. They keep getting a signal. The host isn't allowing me to talk. Anyways, the bylaw certainly makes a statement, but as has always been the problem with the idling bylaw, it's on the books, but it very seldom gets enforced for the reasons that Chris mentioned. We are trying to establish a culture here of making certain goals achievable. And I wonder whether even more effective than a bylaw or in addition to a bylaw, we might create bumper stickers that we could put on city vehicles and said, I don't idle. And as people see that, they would begin to realize that, yeah, I've got to think about my idling. And I'm just wondering what the thoughts of people on the committee might be on that regard.
Comments? Jody?
I think that's a great idea as an education piece. So perhaps that's one of the materials that we would produce as a committee, possibly to distribute amongst the city vehicles and add as long as it's approved, I guess. I don't know if there are any regulations around corporate vehicles and what you're allowed to put on them, but maybe a magnetic one. And also to have the bumper stickers for other individuals that might want to add it to their own car.
Yeah. well, one of the issues is finding energy and environment, finding money within our budget for some of the educational materials. So we can discuss that at an upcoming meeting. We do have some money left in the budget for this year. Sammy. Unmute, Sammy.
There we go. Yeah, my second thought was just around enforcement. It wasn't mentioned a lot, and I understand that it's a real issue regarding that. But I was just wondering if there's a way to increase enforcement or just increase the mention of it somehow around that. That was just my concern.
Okay, well, I think Chris has said Mike Bites is going to help with getting posts, all that out about it. Yeah.
Yeah, so through the chair, I think the idea is this group would put together some draft messaging similar to, I believe you guys have worked with Mike in the past on a couple items. So I think if this group's able to put together some, come together and put some draft messaging forward, then Mike will be able to assist in kind of any wordsmithing or suggestions and getting that posted.
Okay. Well, we are working with him on posts, so I think that's very doable, of course. Any further comments? We don't need a motion. We've already made our motion. Do we? I'm sorry, Craig. Unmute.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm just wondering whether or not, I know enforcement's an issue, you just can't do it, but education is the way to go, of course, but could you utilize some of the things or vehicles such as maybe, I don't know, tax forms or whatever that go out to the public to put a factoid in there, sort of a rolling, did you know fact about idling or two-stroke engines or something, just that a person can see that when it comes to, they open up their tax bill or something like that. It sort of include sort of rolling facts about things like this, so that it gets in front of people that way. Would that, something like that little thing, be an idea of some sort? I don't know, an idea.
Good idea. Any further comments? So do you need something more from us now, Chris, in order to proceed?
Through the chair, no, I was just looking for feedback. So if there's no significant concerns in moving forward, then we'll be looking to submit this report to the ITS subcommittee on May 26th.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for taking this on. So the other thing is, I guess, so maybe on our agenda for next time, we might have a discussion about the educational aspect of this and what we might put forward before we finish up for the summer. Okay, so back to the agenda. What have we got? So Emily, okay, next is Mike Sullivan on energy efficient building requirements. Is there anything more on that, Mike Sullivan?
There is nothing more, but I would like to comment on what I read of the other subcommittee and or the subcommittee of council that dealt with the matter, and I thought quite effectively described what a passive house was. Quite effectively, the staff report, at least, talked in terms of the things we didn't know. We didn't know that it was illegal to require a builder to have something better than Ontario Building Code. It is illegal to offer a builder a reduction in the development charges in return for building a more efficient home. And so the end result was a suggestion that there be some kind of subsidy, and that the amount that was down was about $2,000, which I don't think will attract any great amounts of net zero building going on here. I think that means that the what's left for Stratford is to appeal to the federal government and to the provincial government for changes to the rules that allow Stratford to do the kinds of things that Stratford wants to do, or at least that we've suggested that Stratford do. There is a suggestion that this go forward to the 2022 budget, and that's, I believe, the next stage in this. But I was I was delighted to see that it got some newspaper coverage too, because that means this is now something that is clearly in the mind of the public.
Okay, thank you. Jeff?
Jody, you're on ITS, and I watched a bit of the meeting after our committee working group meeting the other day. Can you speak to the Whitby standards and whether that's kind of a it seems, from the way it was described in the meeting, seemed like a sort of halfway voluntary, halfway regulatory approach that Whitby is taking?
Yeah, I can talk about it a little bit. So it's a tiered system. So I did actually go to a presentation about it with some of my municipal council peers. And they described it as a voluntary system that over time, each tier would then become mandatory. So there's 4 tiers. Tier 1 is the very few things that municipalities can do that could be required of builders right now. So things that are that have to do with sort of the outer envelope of the house. There are some ways, it's not really how to build the house, but there are some factors that can be added, even green space, those kind of things that the municipality has some control over is tier 1. So they are allowed to require some things that the municipality is allowed to control. And then tier 2 through 4 are voluntary. And it's sort of, they build on each other. So the idea is that, let's say, I think tier 2, they were hoping in the next 3 years that the Ontario Building Code would come up to meet those standards. And they already have the standards written out. And so they would announce, like, in 2026, now everybody has to meet tier 2 standards so that developers know what's coming. And then same thing with tier 3. Tier 4 would be the net zero or passive house standards. So the idea is also then to encourage the provincial government and say, look, like, we have these standards, but this is where we want to go. Like, we want to see this happening by 2030, that we would get there. And the nice part about it is the more municipalities that kind of adopt these, they're called green development standards, as a voluntary program, then we could go to the province and say, look, like, however many municipalities are now would like this to be a requirement. And we already have things in place. We're talking to developers about it so that they know what's coming, right? Like, you can build this type of house now, but in 3 years, you're going to need to meet these standards. The other thing that I found really interesting is that in Ontario, there's not enough tradespeople that know how to do these things. So that's another piece of it where you need to get the training out there over the next 3 years to say, okay, yeah, we need this type of thing done. We need this many more people who know how to do it, because they were running into it that even maybe I don't know if that happened in the Markham subdivision, but they were looking for contractors who could actually fulfill some of these requirements, and there weren't enough. So that's another challenge. But I do think that this development system is a good idea because it takes a structured approach. And if a lot of municipalities go along the same route, and actually the one in Whitby is based on the Toronto one. So Toronto developed their own green development standards. The Whitby one is a scaled down version for smaller municipality. They're still bigger than us, but maybe we're the next people to scale it a little bit smaller so that, you know, it would be more applicable to other municipalities, and that we kind of work together in that sense. So I was really encouraging the subcommittee that we would kind of go that direction. And the problem, again, which we already heard today, is Stratford's quite small. So we don't have the in-house staff to be able to even produce a report on moving towards the green development standards. So that's why it has to go to the budget next year to hire a consultant to go through and be able to decide what it is that Stratford can and can't do. We would have the staff to implement it, but we need somebody to develop the system for us. So that's sort of where it's at.
So, just any other questions, comments on that? Is this part of what Johnny was talking about? This would be another consultant.
Yeah, no, that's a different thing. His comment was, you know, within our own staff, we don't have experts in different fields. We only have so many engineers, and they're not necessarily experts in different fields. So we need to hire out for those type of projects.
So this is another study. Thank you, Jody. Mike Sullivan. Unmute, please.
Ryan, there we go. There's a whole bunch of federal money coming free in the next few years, and perhaps I'm not sure what the appropriate vehicle for this is, but someone inside the city of Stratford or inside our committee should be writing to the ministries to put our hand out, because if we're prepared to put some money in towards encouraging development that is passive or closer to passive, perhaps the federal government, which hasn't changed the federal building code yet and isn't going to till 2030 by the looks of things, but they've got money. And so that money is in part for retrofits, but there's $5,000 promised per dwelling to offset the cost of energy efficiencies as it's being built. And so maybe we need to make a connection between ourselves or the city and the federal government.
That makes sense. Yeah, and I think in our discussion, I'm not sure if Ed Dulovic there? I think he might have made a mention of possible grant money, even to just get going with the study. And as soon as we get a grant for something, then of course it's much easier to convince people that it should be part of the budget because it's being covered by another level of government. So yeah, definitely we'll have to keep our eye out on whatever's coming down the pipe there.
And who would be responsible for making those inquiries?
Well, the staff that are in the ITS or IDS department would be the ones kind of keeping an eye on it. And so in order to refer to the budget, they have a list, and hopefully they would be looking at the list and also looking at the grant structures and sort of matching up what it is that we want to do next year. And is there possible money coming from different places?
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, on to the next. Sammy, Reusable Container Program. Are you unmuted?
There we go. So yeah, I'm not sure, you might have heard, there's been a couple social media posts, but 3 restaurants so far in Stratford have signed on with the Reusable Container Company, a friendlier company. So it's the Pulp, Hazos, and Mercer. You can order from them. I'm not sure. I think some of them, some of their dishes don't fit in those containers, but they are using them. And I ordered from the Pulp last week, and it was an amazing feeling to have it in a reusable container. But we're also not just trying to focus on this company, because again, we're of course trying to encourage restaurants to sign on, and we're hoping to get more restaurants signed on with them. But again, there's also a group of citizens who are still working behind the scenes to address multitude of issues. So what they're working on right now is researching other opportunities, because the Friendlier company doesn't fit for all of the restaurants here in Stratford. So, for example, they don't have cups. So for coffee shops who want to do takeout, like Revel, they have compostable right now. Or for restaurants who don't agree with using plastic, because there's some debate over whether aluminum versus plastic versus glass. So we're just trying, that's one of what the committee is doing, is to research different options for restaurants. We're also trying to figure out the alfresco program, hopefully work with that and look at getting some more receptacles for around Stratford to address organic waste, but also a collection of these new containers. We are also working on communications, so that can be through trying to raise awareness about single-use items, plastic waste, while also trying to get the word out there about these restaurants who have signed on, while also trying to support and raise awareness about what other restaurants are doing, because of course using this company is not the only sustainable option. So we're trying to also lift up other restaurants who have their own initiatives. Just fair warning, my dogs might go crazy. My mom's just getting home. And finally, we're hoping to present to potentially City Council, ITS, potentially the Rotary Club. We're just trying to get ourselves out there and make ourselves well known. And we're hoping for a press release within the next week or so.
That's great. What about Mike Bites doing something, making a post when you're ready?
We're hoping to connect with him with that press release.
There are the dogs. Okay, any comments, questions on that? Great, thank you so much, Sammy. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing, wonderful initiative. So update on phase out of Ontario's gas plants. Well, we've
Sorry, before we, I actually had a question related to the, I don't know, I can't remember whether it was I think it was our last meeting, but it could also have been in the carbon reduction context. You mentioned that the Eco Club had reached out to Tim Hortons about managing the sort of litter situation between here and Northwestern. Is there any update on that or further contacts?
Sammy?
Yeah, I just had to wait for the allowance to be unmuted. Yeah, so unfortunately we have not heard back. We dropped the letter off a while ago. But I agree that it's important to make that contact with them. So at our next Eco Club meeting, I can definitely bring up trying to connect with them again, and hopefully they'll respond this time.
Okay, great. But did I see your hand up, Mike Jorna? No. Okay. So the gas plant, we'll wait. Emily wants to follow up on that, so we'll wait till June. We've done the bylaw ground source meeting options for the city. I guess we've covered that in our presentation today. Kate, over to you. Campaign to reduce food waste. You're on the agenda here. Could you?
Hi. Excellent. Thank you. So on our city's website, we have just added a link for a document that the Canadian Federation of University Women put together for food waste. And it speaks on not just dealing with the problem, putting it in the green bin, definitely a solution, but getting to the basis of it. Are you buying too much, and can you use leftovers, that sort of thing? So it's a great document that educates on food waste. So that is now available on the city's website.
Great, thank you. And there was discussion about having Mike put out a post in collaboration with CFUW on all this too, on social media, or?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know the timeline on it or the schedule, but yeah, I think he's in the loop on that one.
Great, okay, thank you. Well, one of the things that came out of our last carbon reduction working group meeting was that we should put a priority on a waste webinar in our webinar series. So I think we'd be looking to do that in the fall.
That would be
Okay.
awesome.
Yeah. Any other comments on that? We overlooked anything here? Okay, so on to new business, the Blue Communities Project, Mike Sullivan.
I was unaware that the city of Stratford had already done something on it. The Blue Communities is essentially cities around the world adopting 3 points. One is that water and sanitation are human rights. 2, that there would be a phase out of bottled water in municipal facilities and municipal events, which Bonnie says we've already done. Thank you very much. And the 3rd is to ensure that we are promoting publicly financed, owned and operated water and wastewater services in face of the privatization agenda that has taken root in other countries, not so much in Canada. And that's the essence of the Blue Community Project. If we've already done this, then we don't need to. I wasn't aware of it, but I haven't had time to research what the city of Stratford has already done. So if somebody can fill me in, that would be great.
Bonnie, I think you were, I mean, is this the same as Blue Dot?
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
We
Yes.
did that, I forget how many years ago. I can look back and see if I can find it. Or did I already send it? I can't remember. I sent it to somebody I know. And I know we changed it a bit so that we could actually follow it, because what the original one that came out from the David Suzuki Foundation was, we wouldn't have been able to do it as a city of our size, but staff came back with something that they felt they could follow. If I remember that correctly, because we've had several resolutions. I've been on council, 14 years, and there's been several different types of resolutions that have come through like this, so.
Maybe if we are, something we should put on our climate change page. You know, just say Stratford is a blue dot or blue community adhering to these principles. We could certainly put that up on the climate change page if we are. How do we find out if we are?
Don't know.
I don't know.
I'll look it up again, because I've already looked it up for somebody else, and I went to the Blue Dot page and we were registered there, and I think it had the date and everything. So I'll just send it out to everybody.
Well, then maybe we can get Mike to put it up on the page, and then it will be there, and then we'll know. We'll have it.
Could we maybe, I just see that Tatiana's here. Could Tatiana potentially, does she have the resources to look into that?
I'm sure it's on the website somewhere, but
okay.
It might even be on our page. I don't know.
It's not on our page, but we can certainly put it there. I don't think it's there, but if it isn't, let's put it there. Okay, that's it. Upcoming events, there's nothing there.
Sorry,
Although,
I was just gonna say the privatization piece is something to watch for in the coming months and years. I know Minto was was very close to replacing some of their obviously public wastewater infrastructure with a P3 model that through the Canada Infrastructure Bank that the Minto Council thankfully backed away from in the face of a lot of opposition. But as we, as the city looks at, updating our water master plan and looking at replacing older infrastructure, we need to make sure that you know, that it remains a public, you know, publicly owned and you know, a basic right to be in accord with those principles. I don't know that we're quite there yet, but that's something to be aware of for sure.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Bonnie?
December 14th, 2015. I just looked on the Blue Dot Foundation.
Okay.
That's when we joined.
Okay.
So we just need to publicize that we're there.
Yeah, we'll put it on, we can put what that means on the climate change page.
I think it was the University Federation of Women that had inquired. There was, or maybe it was Sharon Collingwood. Anyway, somebody had inquired a couple of years ago about it, and I had looked it up and sent
I
it.
think it was Sharon, actually. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we'll put it on the page and not just that we are, but what it means. Okay, I can follow up with Mike on that. Anything else? Upcoming events? Oh, Emily Skelding. Sorry, didn't see your hand.
No, that's okay. I hope this is a good time in the agenda to ask this. Just a quick question to either the counselors or city staff. Did the climate change coordinator position get fulfilled? Are we going to be seeing the presentation of the climate action plan and for us, for the webinars, for the climate reduction group, for planning our future webinars? Do we know if there has been a candidate fulfilled on that on the county level?
Jody?
I'd be happy for Tatiana to talk to it as well, but from what I understand, I did ask earlier in the week. And so the hiring of this coordinator is with Perth County, and I think North Perth or West Perth, or one of the Perths is in charge of actually doing the hiring process. So they put out their ad, and I think they're, you know, going through candidates. So it's coming. It's just a little slower than we would like. But yeah, I don't know if Tatiana has any more information than that.
Do you, Tatiana?
Through the chair, no, I don't. That is all the information I have. I believe North Perth is overseeing the recruitment of it. We're hoping that once they have a selected candidate, they'll let us know. And then that way we can prepare to bring the climate change coordinator along with the climate plan to Stratford City Council for consideration.
Yeah, and I'm going to suggest somewhere along the line that that we make sure the city of Stratford makes sure that we push the other municipalities a little bit more so that this gap that happened doesn't happen again. Like advertising positions sooner or making a decision sooner on keeping the person on. And I personally think that if the other municipalities aren't enthusiastic about carrying on with that contract, I think the city of Stratford should pick it up and we should have the person all to ourselves.
Yeah, great. Well, it's one of our motions somewhere along the line. We did make a motion from Energy and Environment about staff resources. So it's in the motions that have gone forward. Any other new business, anybody? Okay, we'll be in touch about our webinar on May 26th. Hope you'll all be there. And we'll be back in touch with you, the panelists, about that part of it as well. Okay, the date of the next meeting, and I guess it will be the last meeting of this year until the fall, is June 3rd at 4 p.m. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Mike Dorna, second, Sammy, all in favor? Great. Thank you all very much. That was a terrific meeting.